At 3:14 in the morning, on the 42nd floor of Hanul Tower, Amara Nwosu found a suicide note folded into the bottom of a corner office waste bin, and for 3 seconds she thought it was nothing. A rejected memo, the kind of paper rich men threw away without looking twice. Then she read the first line. She did not catch every word of the Korean above it, but the English scrawled underneath was unmistakable, careful, deliberate, the handwriting of a man choosing each word like it might be his last chance to say it right. Someone had written goodbye tonight, and meant it. She was not supposed to touch anything on this floor beyond the trash itself, and she knew exactly what one complaint could cost a cleaner on her kind of contract. 8 years of careful work undone by a single wrong decision at 3:30 in the morning. She had no Korean fluent enough to explain herself to security, no friend in this city to call at this hour, and no proof this wasn't some private joke she was about to embarrass herself over. She had every reason to fold the note back up, drop it in the bin, and finish her shift like she'd seen nothing at all. She stood there instead, note trembling slightly in her gloved hand. Instead, at 3:19 in the morning, Amara dialed a number she had been carrying in her uniform pocket for 3 weeks, a stranger's private cell phone, written by his own hand on the back of a business card she had once returned instead of keeping. The line began to ring somewhere far below her, in the dark, and she had no idea yet who would answer, or whether anyone would answer at all, or whether by the time it rang enough times it would already be too late for anything she could say to matter. She did not yet know that the man she was trying to reach ran one of the largest companies in the country, or that a single phone call, made by a cleaner who had every reason to walk away, would arrive at the exact minute it needed to. She only knew that somewhere in this glittering tower, someone had decided nobody would notice if he disappeared, that the note in her hand had been written by a man convinced his absence would barely register. She was about to prove him wrong, though it would take her the rest of the year to fully understand how wrong. Amara Nwosu had cleaned the executive floors of Hanul Tower for 3 years, long enough to know the building better at 3 in the morning than most of the men whose names were etched on the doors ever would in daylight. She worked in order, always the same order. West Corridor first, then the corner offices, then the boardroom glass that had to be wiped twice, or the streaks showed under the morning sun. She liked the quiet of that hour, the hum of the servers behind the utility door, the way the whole glowing tower belonged, briefly, only to her, and the handful of guards half asleep at their monitors downstairs. She had read the nameplates on every door for 3 years without ever speaking to the men behind them, men who left half-eaten dinners and unsigned contracts and, once, an engagement ring in a desk drawer nobody ever came back for. Tonight, the corner office on 42 belonged to Executive Director Han So-jun, a name she knew only from the brass plate and the particular mess he tended to leave. Coffee cups stacked with military precision even in exhaustion, a man who apparently could not sleep any more than she could afford to. She wheeled her cart to his waste bin the way she had 1,000 nights before, reached in without looking, and felt paper crumpled tighter than trash usually was, balled hard, deliberate, the way a hand closes around something it wants gone for good. Habit made her unfold it, nothing more at first, the same habit that made her check every waste bin for stray staples before the recycling truck jammed on them at dawn. The paper was warm still from being held, warmer than an empty office at 3 in the morning had any business feeling. Not typed, handwritten, blue ink pressed hard enough to nearly tear through in places, half in Korean she could only partly read, and half in careful, deliberate English, the English of a man who had learned it formally and used it only when he needed to be precise about something that mattered. She caught words before she caught sentences. Forgive me, tell her the world, goodbye. Her stomach dropped the way it had once when she misread a departure gate and thought she'd lost her flight home, except this time there was no gate agent to correct her, no one at all to tell her she'd read it wrong. She told herself, quickly, that it could be a rehearsed line for some corporate speech, or a scene from a drama script left behind by an assistant, anything other than what it plainly was. She set the note flat on the desk and read it again, slower, and this time there was no other explanation left to hide behind. Someone had sat in this chair tonight and written his own ending. She looked at the closed door, the dark hallway beyond it, and understood that whatever came next would not wait politely for daylight. She had been in Seoul 8 years, sent by an agency that placed Nigerian workers in cleaning contracts nobody local wanted at 3 in the morning, and she had built her whole life around what that contract explicitly forbade. Do not touch personal belongings. Do not linger in occupied offices. Do not, under any circumstance, involve yourself in matters beyond your assigned duties. She knew what one formal complaint could do to a worker on her visa category. Knew it the way she knew her mother's blood pressure numbers and her brother Chidi's tuition balance in Enugu. Knew it because she had watched two women on her own crew get quietly replaced and quietly sent home for far smaller mistakes than reading a stranger's last words. She was 6 months from finishing the caregiver certificate she had been studying toward at night for 2 years, the first real step back toward the nursing degree she'd abandoned when her father's stroke emptied the family's savings and rearranged every plan she'd ever made for herself. Every calculation she had ever made in this country weighed risk against what her family needed from her, and by every calculation she knew, this note was not her business, would never be her business, was in fact the exact opposite of everything she had trained herself to walk past without seeing. She stood there anyway, note in hand, unable to make her feet carry her back to the cart. The brass plate on the door read, Executive Director Han So-jun, and something in her chest recognized the name before her mind caught up. 3 weeks earlier, she had found his business card on the elevator floor, slipped from an unzipped coat pocket, and instead of pocketing it the way some of the newer girls might have, she had carried it up to his floor and left it with his assistant, refusing the folded bill the assistant tried to press into her hand on his behalf. A small transaction that had felt more important to get right than the money made it sound. He had found her the next night on her rounds to thank her properly, an odd thing for a man like him to bother with at that hour, and had written a second number on the back of a fresh card before she could think of a polite way to refuse it. "Call me directly if anything is ever wrong up here at night," he'd said. "Not the front desk, they take 20 minutes to answer anything," and looked, for a moment, like a man unused to asking anyone for help either. She had kept the card in her uniform pocket since, not entirely sure why, only that being trusted with a direct line had felt like being seen as something more than a uniform moving through empty rooms. She understood now, standing in his empty office at 3:30, exactly why a man might hand a stranger a number like that. She went to the guard station first, because that was the order things were supposed to happen in, and because some part of her still hoped a uniform with more authority than hers would simply take this out of her hands entirely. The night guard was young, half watching a soccer replay on his phone, and he barely looked up when she set the note on the counter and tried to explain in the careful, limited Korean she'd built from 2 years of night classes and worse pronunciation than she liked to admit even to herself. He read 3 lines, shrugged, and told her executives left strange things behind all the time, drafts, complaints, once a resignation letter that turned out to be a joke for a colleague's retirement party, so this was probably nothing either. "Log it in the morning incident book," he said, "and put it back exactly where you found it. We're not paid to read what rich men throw away at 3 in the morning. She tried once more, pointed at the word goodbye circled in her own mind, if not on the page, and he waved her off toward the elevator without unlocking his eyes from the screen, already scrolling to the next highlight. It was, she would think later, the first door that closed on her that night, though it would not be the last. She called her supervisor next, a woman named O who managed 6 buildings and slept, on good nights, 4 hours between shifts, and who answered the phone the way people answer when they already suspect the news is bad. Supervisor O answered groggy and immediately irritated at being woken for anything short of a fire, and when Amara explained what she'd found, the irritation sharpened fast into something closer to fear. "Put it back," O said, her voice low and quick. "You do not get involved in what happens on executive floors. I have lost workers over less than this, whole contracts over less than this. Do you understand what you are asking me to risk on your behalf?" Amara said she understood. She did not say she had already decided not to listen, that some decisions, once made quietly enough inside a person, stopped needing anyone else's permission. She stood in the hallway after the call ended, phone still warm against her ear, and thought about how easily 2 people in authority had told her, within 10 minutes of each other, that a man's life was not her department, not her problem, not worth the risk to her own small, carefully built life. She thought about how convenient it always was for someone else's problem to become nobody's problem at all. She thought, unbidden, of the 11 minutes it had taken her family to call an ambulance for her father, 11 minutes of everyone assuming someone else in the house had already picked up the phone, 11 minutes that had cost him the use of his right hand and, some days, his patience for the daughter who had left for Seoul instead of staying to nurse him herself. Nobody had meant any harm, nobody ever did. It was simply easier, in the moment, to believe that surely somebody else would act, that surely this was not the hour, or the place, or the job description that required you personally to do anything at all, that surely a stranger, somewhere better positioned, would step in before it mattered. She had sworn to herself on the plane out of Lagos that she would not become the kind of person who waited for somebody else, that whatever else Seoul cost her, it would not cost her that particular version of herself. She looked down at the note still creased in her palm, at the name on the desk plate through the open door behind her, and felt the decision settle rather than arrive all at once, the way water settles once it finally finds the lowest point in a room, quiet, inevitable, already done before she'd said a word. At 3:19 in the morning, she pulled the business card from her pocket and dialed the number he had written on the back himself, not the switchboard, not security, not anyone whose job description covered a moment like this one. Her hands were not entirely steady, and she noticed that distantly, the way she noticed most things about her own body when her mind had moved somewhere more urgent. She had no plan for what to say if a stranger's voice answered, no plan at all beyond the certainty that doing nothing was no longer a choice she could live inside of. Not tonight, not with his handwriting still visible through the crease marks in her other hand. The line connected somewhere far below her in the tower, and she heard it begin to ring, once, twice, the sound absurdly ordinary against the size of what she was about to ask it to interrupt. An ordinary electronic chime standing between a man and whatever he had already decided. She pressed the phone harder against her ear, as if that alone could make someone, anyone, pick up in time, and counted the rings without meaning to, the way she counted everything that frightened her, one number at a time. 2 floors below, in the hush of an underground parking level lit only by motion sensor strips, a phone lay lit and buzzing on a passenger seat beside a second folded sheet of paper, calmer than the one Amara had found, written after the one she'd found, the one he actually meant to leave behind. Han So-jun sat with both hands on the wheel of a car he had not started, engine off, city noise swallowed by 3 floors of concrete above him, the silence so complete he could hear his own pulse in his ears. He was not thinking in the frantic way people imagine that hour must feel. He was simply, finally, tired in a way sleep had stopped reaching months ago, tired past the board meeting that had ended 6 hours earlier with his father telling the room, not unkindly, that grief had made his only son unfit to run anything worth running. The phone rang against the seat, and he looked at it the way a man looks at weather he has already decided not to go out in, something to be waited out rather than answered. He let it ring, and told himself, without much conviction, that whoever it was could try again in the morning, if there was going to be a morning that mattered to him at all. The call rang out and dropped into voicemail, and Amara, standing 3 floors above him with no idea where he was or whether he could even hear her, did not hang up. She spoke instead, in English because her Korean would fail her exactly when precision mattered most, halting at first and then faster, more urgent, the words arriving before she could polish them into anything careful. She said she had found what he wrote. She said she didn't know him, wasn't trying to interfere in his business, understood this call could cost her the only job keeping her family afloat back home, and was making it anyway. She said whoever Yuna was, the note kept saying her name like it mattered more than anything else written on the page, and that Yuna needed him to pick up a phone somewhere tonight, needed him to just call back or go home, or let somebody find him before this went any further than it already had. Her voice caught on the last word before the recording cut her off automatically, mid-sentence, and she stood in the silence afterward with no way of knowing if a single sentence of it had reached anyone at all, or vanished into whatever server held unanswered messages until someone finally listened. A voicemail was not enough, and she knew it before she'd even finished leaving it, the certainty settling in her chest like a stone. She went back down to the guard station a second time, and this time she did not wait to be dismissed the way she had the first. She told the young guard plainly that this was not an incident book matter, that a man's life might be ending somewhere in this building right now while he scrolled through a soccer replay, and that if he would not pull up the parking level cameras in the next 60 seconds, she would call the police herself and tell every reporter who asked that a Hanul Group security officer had refused to check when a cleaner warned him twice. It was not entirely a bluff, and it was not entirely true either, but something in the flat certainty of her voice, the way she did not raise it even once, made him stop scrolling his phone and actually look at her properly for the first time that night. For the first time since she'd found the note, someone in a position to act chose to believe her instead of dismissing her, and his hand moved toward the camera console before he'd even finished deciding to trust her. The camera on parking level 2 showed a car, engine off, headlights dark, one occupant motionless behind the wheel for 11 unbroken minutes according to the timestamp, ticking silently in the corner of the frame. The guard's face changed the moment he saw it, tired indifference collapsing into something closer to alarm, and he radioed the building manager while already moving for the elevator, footsteps suddenly urgent on the marble floor. Amara went with them without asking permission, and nobody stopped her, not out of respect exactly, but because in the sudden scramble, no one thought to question why a cleaner was riding down with them at nearly 4 in the morning. The elevator dropped through the tower in silence. Floor numbers ticking down over the door, none of them saying anything. All 3 of them watching the same red digits fall. The way people watch a clock during a countdown they can't control, willing the numbers to move faster and dreading, in equal measure, whatever waited for them at the bottom. They found the car exactly where the camera said it would be, parked at an angle slightly too careless for a man who usually parked with the same precision he stacked his coffee cups, a small detail that told Amara, before anyone spoke, how far from himself he had drifted that night. The guard knocked twice on the window, and after a pause long enough for 3 hearts to stop entirely, Han So-jun startled upright, disoriented, blinking against the sudden flashlight glare like a man surfacing from somewhere deep underwater. He rolled the window down slowly, his movements stiff from sitting still too long in the cold. He looked at the guard, at the building manager, and last at the small woman in a gray uniform standing slightly behind them, a familiar face he could not immediately place at 3:30 in the morning, though something in him recognized her before his exhausted mind caught up. "Who called you?" he asked, his voice rough with hours of silence, and something underneath the roughness that sounded almost like fear of the answer. Amara held up the note, still creased from her pocket, and answered without raising her voice, without softening it either. "I did." Amara did not sleep before her call-in shift the next morning, replaying the parking garage on a loop behind her eyes every time she closed them, and when she arrived at the agency office braced for a reprimand, an itemized list of every rule she had broken on the 42nd floor, Supervisor O looked almost frightened to see her instead. "The Hanul family wants to speak with you," O said, refusing to elaborate further no matter how Amara pressed, sliding a slip of paper across the desk with an address and a time written on it in her own careful, worried hand. Amara took it without asking further questions, though every instinct she had built over 8 years of careful contracts told her that being summoned to speak with a client family rarely ended with good news for the worker involved, no matter how the invitation was phrased. She spent the entire walk to the bus stop rehearsing quiet, dignified responses to her own dismissal, arranging in her head exactly how she would explain to her mother why the Seoul money had stopped coming. What Amara did not yet know, standing at that bus stop turning the address over in her hands, was the full shape of the man she had called. Han So-jun, 38, executive director of Hanul Group and presumed heir to one of the country's largest conglomerates, had buried his wife Min-so 2 winters earlier after an illness that moved faster than anyone around him had time to prepare for, and had spent every day since running his life on schedules instead of feeling, raising his 7-year-old daughter Yuna through a rotation of nannies and a guilt he never once mentioned aloud to anyone who might have understood it. The board meeting that had ended 6 hours before Amara's call had not really been about numbers at all, whatever the minutes would later say. His father, Chairman Han Tae-sik, had used the word soft in front of 11 board members, and everyone in that glass room, including his own son, had understood exactly what kind of unfitness the old man really meant by it. The meeting was arranged in a small private dining room rather than an office, his choice, deliberately informal, though nothing about the marble floor or the silent staff standing along the wall felt informal to Amara when she arrived in her one good coat, the same coat she wore to church on the rare Sundays she wasn't working. She kept her arms crossed and her answers short, braced for either a scolding or a payoff dressed up as gratitude, the 2 outcomes she had spent the whole bus ride preparing herself to survive. Han thanked her plainly instead, without theater, visibly uncomfortable with the shape of his own gratitude, and offered her, in careful sequence, money, a permanent staff position, a transfer to whatever contract she wanted anywhere in the company. He said it the way a man recites something he rehearsed in a mirror, needing to get every word right and still sounding, somehow, like none of them were quite enough for what had actually happened. She turned down the money without hesitating long enough for him to insist twice. "I did not call because I wanted something back," she said. "I called because someone should have." What she did ask for, once he pressed her to name anything at all, surprised him more than any refusal could have. Not a reward for herself, but a change to the agency's rule that had told her, twice that night, to walk away and mind her contract, so that whoever found themselves in her position next would not have to choose between a stranger's life and their own job the way she had been forced to choose. Han sat with that answer longer than he sat with anything else she said, turning it over the way he turned over a difficult clause in a contract, and it was only after she'd gone, after the staff had cleared the untouched food from the table, that he realized she had never once, in the entire conversation, asked him who Yuna was, or what any of this had actually cost him, or why a man who owned half of a glass tower had been sitting alone in a parked car underneath it. He sat with that omission the longest of all, turning it over long after the dining room had emptied. Weeks passed before their paths crossed again, and when they did, it happened sideways, the way most real things in Amara's life seemed to arrive, unplanned and slightly inconvenient and entirely necessary anyway. Yuna's regular nanny left suddenly for a family emergency in Busan, and through a chain of scheduling that Han insisted, a little too quickly and a little too carefully, was coincidence. Amara found herself assigned a few evening hours at the Han residence between her cleaning shifts, officially just household help. Nothing more, nothing that needed further explanation to anyone at the agency. Yuna, 7 years old and entirely unfiltered in the way only children that age can afford to be, studied Amara across the kitchen island the first evening with open curiosity rather than suspicion, and asked bluntly why her English sounded like the cartoons and why her hair looked nothing like her friend's mother's. Amara answered both questions plainly, without flinching, describing braids and head wraps and the particular music of a Lagos classroom the way she might describe any ordinary fact of a life, and something in the girl's face settled, as if plain, unembarrassed answers were rarer in that grand, quiet house than she was used to. Wednesdays became a fixture without anyone deciding they would, the way habits form quietly around people who are simply, reliably present. English homework spread across the kitchen table, Amara correcting sentences with the patience of someone who remembered exactly how frightening a foreign language could feel at 7 years old, alone at a desk with words that refused to sit still. She taught Yuna to make jollof rice one evening, the girl insisting on extra spice and then coughing dramatically through the first bite while refusing loudly to admit defeat, and Amara laughing harder than she had in months at the sheer theater of it, tears actually gathering at the corners of her eyes. In return, Yuna corrected Amara's Korean pronunciation with the exaggerated seriousness only a child could manage, folding her small arms like a stern teacher over words Amara had apparently been saying wrong for years without anyone bothering to tell her. Between the two jobs, crossing the city on the last subway before the trains thinned out toward midnight, Amara found herself smiling at strangers on the platform for no particular reason at all, a lightness she hadn't noticed missing until it came back. Han began coming home earlier some evenings, telling himself it was only to check on Yuna before her bedtime, a reasonable, fatherly explanation that required no further examination, and finding himself instead standing quietly in the hallway watching Amara handle a bath-time tantrum with a patience no bribe or threat of his own had ever managed to summon. She did not raise her voice, not once, not even when Yuna's protests reached the pitch that usually sent him retreating to his study with a headache. She simply waited, calm as still water, until the storm in his daughter passed on its own, and then went back to braiding her hair as if nothing had happened at all, as if patience were simply a fact about her rather than an effort. He noticed, without wanting to examine too closely why he noticed, that the apartment had started sounding different lately, less like a hallway he passed through on his way somewhere else, and more like somewhere people actually lived, laughed, argued over vegetables, existed. One evening, the ritual stretched past homework and dinner into something neither of them had planned, Amara still at the table when Han came home, in no particular hurry to leave despite the late hour and the early start she had the next morning. It was Yuna who broke the silence, looking up from her plate with the bluntness only a 7-year-old could deliver without any cruelty in it at all, and asked Amara outright if she could be her second mom. The question landed in the kitchen like something dropped from a considerable height, plates and chopsticks suddenly very interesting to look at instead of each other. Amara knelt to Yuna's level instead of answering too quickly, told her gently that she loved spending Wednesdays with her, which was entirely true, without promising anything. Neither of the adults in the room was ready to promise a child who took promises seriously. Han said nothing to correct his daughter either, which was its own kind of answer, and the silence that followed sat between the three of them, unresolved, charged, and entirely too warm to be uncomfortable for very long. Late one night, Yuna, long asleep down the hall, Han and Amara sat at the kitchen table over tea. Neither of them particularly needed the kind of tea people make when they need their hands to have something to do. He told her in the careful, halting way he seemed to say anything that actually mattered about how fast Minseo's illness had moved, weeks instead of the years the doctors had first mentioned, and about how he had spent the last stretch of his marriage rehearsing conversations he never got the chance to actually have. He admitted, finally, turning the cup slowly between his hands rather than looking at her, that the board meeting had not really been what pushed him over that night, whatever the official version of events might suggest. It had been the date on the calendar, the second anniversary of a funeral nobody in the office remembered but him, and the exhausting, unspoken expectation that a man in his position should simply be fine by now, since enough time had technically, mathematically passed. Amara answered him with her own losses instead of sympathy alone, because sympathy alone had never once fixed anything she'd lost either, and told him about her father's stroke, about leaving nursing school in Enugu when the money ran out overnight, about the particular guilt of being the daughter who flew to Seoul while her sister stayed behind to manage their father's slow, difficult recovery, one painful session at a time. She mentioned, almost as an aside, that her caregiver certification exam was only a few months away now, the first real step back toward the degree she'd once abandoned without ever quite forgiving herself for it. Then, watching him carefully over the rim of her cup, she added that at least 3 years of cleaning executive offices had taught her tremendous patience for stubborn men who left their coffee cups stacked like fortress walls, and the smile that pulled at his mouth in response, small and startled, was the first unguarded thing she had seen on his face since the parking garage. She noticed the way he held his coffee cup too carefully some mornings, both hands wrapped fully around it, the particular stillness of a man conserving energy he didn't actually have, and mentioned it only once, lightly, without pushing when he deflected the way she'd fully expected him to deflect. What she did instead, a few days later, was leave a small tin of ginger tea from home on his desk one evening while he was still in a meeting down the hall. No note attached this time, nothing that needed explaining or answering or replying to at all. It was a quiet, deliberate contrast to the last piece of paper that had passed between his desk and her hands, and both of them understood the difference without either one saying it aloud. The tin sitting there the next morning like a small, wordless promise that some things could simply be given, not analyzed to death, not turned into a transaction that needed repaying with money, or titles, or anything else his family knew how to offer. He kept the empty tin afterward, longer than made any practical sense, on the corner of his desk where the coffee cups used to accumulate. He started a sentence one evening he did not finish, standing in the kitchen doorway while she gathered her coat to leave for the last train. "I ask specifically for your hours to be assigned here," he said, and then stopped himself mid-thought. The rest of it caught somewhere behind his teeth like a word he wasn't yet sure he had the right to say out loud. She noticed the stop, the way his jaw tightened around whatever came next. She did not push him to finish it, though something in her chest leaned forward anyway, waiting in a way she hadn't let herself wait for anything in a long time. Before either of them could decide what came next, or whether anything should come next at all, Yuna's voice called down from upstairs asking for one more glass of water, and the moment dissolved into ordinary parenthood, leaving them both a little relieved and a little disappointed in exactly the same breath. Word of the arrangement reached Chairman Han Tae-sik through a driver's offhand report long before his son thought to mention it himself, and the summons that followed was cold, immediate, and delivered through an assistant rather than a phone call, which told Han exactly how seriously his father intended it. Tae-sik's fear, when he finally spoke it aloud in his own office, was not cartoonish cruelty, but something closer to old scar tissue reopened, the memory of a younger brother whose standing in the company had never fully recovered from an unsuitable match decades earlier, a scandal the family still did not discuss at dinner. He had already buried a daughter-in-law 2 winters ago, had already watched his son nearly disappear entirely from grief once. He was not prepared, he said flatly, to watch the press circle his only son and heir over a cleaner from the very building where a private tragedy had almost, quietly, become a public one. He said the word cleaner the way he might have said stranger or risk or liability, and did not seem to notice or care how much that single word revealed about everything he was actually afraid of. Tae-sik requested to meet Amara directly, a test disguised as courtesy, and the room he chose for it was formal enough to intimidate anyone it was deliberately built to intimidate, all cold marble and a table too long for the two of them. He asked precise, probing questions about her visa status, her finances, whether she understood exactly what people would say about a woman in her position once the story inevitably found its way out. Amara answered every question directly, without lowering her eyes, and without groveling for an approval she had never once asked to need from him or anyone else. She told him plainly that she had not requested any of this, did not require his blessing to keep visiting a 7-year-old who had asked her, in her own words, to stay a little longer each week, and that if he wanted to understand her actual motives, he was welcome to watch what she did with her time, instead of assuming the worst of it in advance, the way it seemed easiest for him to do. At a Hanul company function weeks later, Tae-sik steered his son publicly towards Song Min-ji, daughter of an allied business family, presenting the match as obviously suitable in front of a room full of guests who all understood exactly what was being arranged and precisely why it was happening tonight of all nights. Amara was present too, on the periphery, helping coordinate catering logistics through her agency, close enough to watch the introduction unfold and close enough to hear the household staff around her murmur about the cleaner who apparently thought she was family now. The phrase passed between them like something sharp being handed carefully from palm to palm. She kept her face still through all of it, the same composed stillness she had learned young, at her father's bedside, at a dozen smaller humiliations before this one, and told herself the sting of being talked about was smaller, ultimately, than the humiliation of letting anyone in that glittering room see it land. After the introductions ended, Han crossed the room deliberately, in full view of guests who noticed exactly what it meant for a man in his position to do so, and walked Amara partway toward the staff exit instead of returning to his own event as protocol and his father's face across the room both silently demanded. Neither of them said very much on the way, just a few quiet words about Yuna's homework, nothing that would explain to an outside observer why he'd bothered at all. He didn't need to say much for the gesture itself to be loud enough on its own, loud enough that 3 separate conversations paused briefly as they passed. Somewhere behind them, near the champagne table, a phone was already lifted and angled, a photograph taken of a moment neither of them yet realized had been captured at all, one that would travel considerably farther than either of them intended it to, farther than a badge or a business card ever had, into rooms neither of them would ever be invited into to explain themselves. The photograph surfaced within days on a gossip site that specialized in exactly this kind of half-story. Han walking a woman in a visible cleaning agency badge toward a staff exit, captioned with a headline that turned 3 quiet seconds of decency into something cheap, reductive, and impossible to argue with once it had already spread. It moved fast in both directions at once, through Hanul's internal message boards where nobody used real names but everybody somehow knew exactly who was meant, and through the group chat, Amara's own cleaning crew used to trade shift swaps and complaints, where suddenly everyone had an opinion about her, her motives, her contract, her right to be anywhere near that building at all. By the second morning, it had a name attached to it anyway, a nickname coined by someone who had never met her, and the nickname was crueler than anything the headline itself had actually said. At the agency, some co-workers offered quiet, careful support, a hand on her shoulder in the break room, a message left unspoken but understood, and others were sharper, one asking flatly if she thought any of this made her special, different from the rest of them pushing the same carts down the same corridors. Supervisor O called her in looking more stressed than angry, explaining that the Hanul contract itself was now under internal review because of the attention, and suggesting, in the gentle language people use when they mean something considerably less gentle, that reassigning Amara to a different building might make the whole story quietly disappear on its own. Amara read the comments beneath the article exactly once, ugly and specific in ways that had almost nothing to do with anything she had actually done, said, or wanted, and closed the app without reading them a second time, refusing to let the hurt become one more thing other people got to witness her carrying. Reassignment meant a different building entirely, across the city, hours that would collide directly with the night classes she needed to finish before her caregiver exam, the exam that mattered more to her actual future than anything currently occupying the Han family's newspapers. She sat with that math for a long time at her kitchen table, longer than she sat with anything about her own hurt feelings, tracing the new commute times on her phone map over and over, as if the distances might change if she looked hard enough. She began seriously weighing whether the safest thing, the smartest thing, the thing that protected the 2 years she had already invested in herself and in nobody else's opinion of her, was simply to step back from the Han household entirely, quietly, before any of this cost her the one thing she had built with absolutely nobody's help but her own. She thought about calling her mother to explain it, and decided against it, unwilling to make her mother worry across an ocean over a decision she hadn't even made yet herself. She told him plainly the next time she saw him that this was no longer only about hurt feelings on either side, that her contract, her class schedule, and the wages her family depended on every single month were all now genuinely at risk because of a photograph neither of them had asked to be taken and neither of them had chosen to explain. She needed him to either make a real decision about what any of this actually was, out loud, to people who mattered, or let her walk away quietly before it cost her everything she had built for herself long before he ever knew her name at all. He had no answer ready, not one worth saying out loud in that hallway, and she left him standing there with the only sentence that mattered still hanging unanswered between them. "I am not asking you to save me," she said, pulling her coat tighter. "I am asking you to decide." Her ultimatum sat with Han for exactly 4 days before he acted, 4 days in which he barely spoke to anyone at the office and slept even less than his usual careful minimum. And when he finally did act, it was not the quiet fix his father's people would certainly have recommended. No payoff to the gossip site, no discreet reassignment paperwork signed on someone else's behalf while everyone looked the other way. He requested time at the company's next internal address instead, and told the true story of that night in the parking garage honestly, plainly, without softening any of it for the room, crediting the cleaner who had called him by a number she had no obligation whatsoever to keep, reframing weeks of tabloid rumor into a plain, uncomfortable truth that put his own vulnerability on permanent record in front of the very board that had called him unfit for exactly this kind of weakness only weeks earlier. He confronted his father directly afterward, in private this time, for the first time in his adult life refusing to soften the sentence before it left his mouth the way he had softened everything else his whole career. Hiding what Amara did and who she had quietly become to him and to Yuna over these past months, he said, was no different from pretending her phone call that night hadn't mattered at all, from erasing the one honest thing that had happened to their family in 2 years of careful appearances. He told Tae-sik plainly that he would rather step back from everything he had spent his whole life being groomed to inherit than build the rest of that life on his father's fear of what people might whisper at dinner parties. Tae-sik did not soften in the way stories like to promise fathers eventually will. He simply went quiet, cornered not by argument, but by the plain, undeniable fact of his own son's honesty, and something in his face recalculated, visibly, for the first time in the entire conversation. While that confrontation played out entirely without her, in a room she would never see, Amara received her own answer, one that had nothing whatsoever to do with the Han family, their board meetings, or their carefully guarded reputation. Her caregiver certification results arrived by email on an ordinary Tuesday morning, and she had passed, comfortably, with a placement offer attached that would move her forward on the exact path she had been quietly building for 2 full years, regardless of what happened next with Han. Regardless of gossip sites or chairmen or unfinished sentences left hanging in kitchen doorways. She read the letter twice at her own small kitchen table, out loud the second time, just to hear the words in her own voice, and understood, with a clarity that steadied her more than anything had in weeks, that whatever she chose to do next would be a choice made entirely from strength rather than need. She pinned the letter to the small corkboard above her desk, beside the photograph of her father, where she would see it every morning before anything else. At the next Hanul function, the same kind of glittering room that had once quietly humiliated her without a single raised voice, Han introduced Amara to colleagues and extended family without qualification or apology of any kind, calling her plainly and simply the woman who had saved his life and the person his daughter now called family, using both facts in the same sentence without flinching from either. He said it in front of Song Min-ji's relatives, in front of murmuring board members who had spent weeks predicting exactly this kind of scandal, without raising his voice and without over-explaining himself, the way a man speaks when he has finally stopped rehearsing every sentence before he says it. Amara, arriving with her own placement letter already secured in her bag, accepted the introduction on entirely equal footing, present in that room because she had chosen to be there that night, not because she needed rescuing from anything at all, not anymore. The room did not erupt into applause, and nobody in it, least of all Amara, expected it to. What shifted was quieter than that, the particular silence of a room full of powerful people recalculating their assumptions in real time, glasses paused halfway to lips. Tae-sik crossed the floor eventually, slowly, not with an embrace, nothing so theatrical or so easy, but with a small, deliberate nod and a full sentence addressed directly to her by name for the first time since they'd met, rather than the word cleaner he had used, without quite meaning to, every single time before tonight. It was not forgiveness exactly, and she did not mistake it for that. It was something closer to the beginning of respect, earned slowly across weeks rather than granted in a single generous evening, which was the only kind of respect either of them would ever have actually trusted anyway. Across the room, Han watched his father say her name and felt something in his own chest loosen for the first time in 2 years.
Weeks later, Tae-sik did something nobody in the family expected of him, least of all himself. He visited Amara, not summoned her this time, at her own small one-room apartment across the city, a space barely large enough for the narrow bed and the desk crowded with textbooks and family photographs sent from Enugu. He said little, in the way men of his generation rarely knew how to say very much of anything at all, but he looked long enough at the certification materials stacked neatly by her window, at the photograph of her father in his wheelchair smiling anyway despite everything the stroke had taken from him, to understand the actual scale of what she had quietly built out of almost nothing, with no family fortune behind her at all. He admitted, plainly and without excess, standing awkwardly near her small kitchen table, that he had misjudged her from the very first meeting. It was not warmth exactly, not yet. It was enough for now.
A season passed the way seasons do once a life finally settles into a shape that actually fits it, without announcement, without ceremony, simply arriving. Amara worked fewer cleaning hours now and more clinical placement hours as part of the bridge program that would eventually carry her toward the nursing degree she had once considered given up for dead in a hospital hallway in Enugu. Wednesdays at the Han apartment had quietly become most days of the week. Homework and jollof rice and Korean pronunciation lessons folded into an ordinary rhythm nobody ever had to formally announce or explain to anyone outside it. Yuna had stopped calling her Miss Amara months earlier, replacing it entirely with a private nickname only the two of them ever used, and neither Han nor Amara had rushed to put a formal name on whatever this had quietly become, content, for now, to let it simply be exactly as steady as it already, undeniably, was. Chitty's tuition was paid 2 semesters ahead now, and her mother had stopped asking, in every phone call, when Amara was finally coming home for good.
On the 42nd floor of Hanul Tower one ordinary night, training a newer cleaner through the same rounds she had once learned herself from a supervisor who never once mentioned kindness as part of the job description, Amara found herself back at the same corner office at 3 in the morning, checking the same waste bin out of old habit she had checked 100 times before that first night quietly rearranged the entire shape of her life. This time the folded paper inside was harmless, ordinary, almost funny. A crayon-drawn thank you card Yuna had made for Appa that had missed the edge of the desk and fallen in with the rest of the ordinary trash by accident. Amara smoothed it out anyway, with the same careful hands, the same unhurried attention she had once given a very different kind of paper, and set it where he would find it first thing in the morning, exactly as she had once tried, with far less certainty and far more fear, to make sure he found something else entirely in time.
On the anniversary of that first night, Han was waiting for her when her shift ended, standing in the same lobby where she had once stood small and uncertain beneath the marble ceiling, with no idea who she was even calling. He handed her something folded, not a reward this time, not a goodbye, just a plain handwritten note he had clearly rewritten more than once, to get exactly right. The same careful blue ink she remembered from a very different piece of paper. "I asked for your hours to be assigned to the house," it read, "because I already knew, before I could admit it even to myself, that I did not want a single day to go by without knowing exactly where you were in it." She read it twice under the tower's lights, slowly, unhurried, while Seoul glittered wide and alive and utterly, gloriously ordinary behind them both. And for the first time since a crumpled piece of paper had changed absolutely everything, folding one open felt like nothing in the world but hope.
Somewhere above them, on the 42nd floor, a newer cleaner was finishing the same rounds Amara had once finished alone, and the tower kept humming quietly on, indifferent and glowing, exactly as it always had, holding, as it turned out, far more than either of them had ever expected it to hold.